Hello, everyone. So, as Sid said, we're going to talk about the forgotten products. Maybe a slightly dramatic title, but we do often see more about software products in the product management world than we do physical. Again, Sid gave my background. The last few years, I've spent a lot of time with physical goods companies, automotive, industrial, even services companies as well. So we're going to talk specifically about physical goods, but services is also a nuance to software digital. So what we're going to talk about today, again, we're going to talk a little bit about the differences, software versus non-software, some of the ways that we as product managers in the physical world can be great, and some common pitfalls to avoid, summary, and then we'll ask some questions, ask and answer some questions, hopefully. So a quick poll, I believe, just to do, and I think someone can show the poll, there you go. I'd love to hear what industries we have represented. So we'll just give just a second if you could do the poll. Okay. And then you or someone will share the results.
Let me know when you're ready for me to end the polling.
Yeah, go ahead. We'll see. Maybe everyone had a chance. Okay, so a lot of financial services, a lot of technology, about 40%. Got some retail manufacturing. Okay, so this will resonate well. Oil and gas a little bit. So great. So some of my contact information is at the end of this as well. So I'd love to chat with you offline as well. You can close that. Thank you so much for doing that. Okay, so you can see that we're all from various industries, right? And so a lot of us, whether or not, as Sid said, whether or not we're kind of software people or not, some of this may resonate with you because it is becoming more and more connected, if you will. So here's the truth of the matter. Most of the content, or at least quite a bit of the content in the product management world, is tailored towards software products. Not all of it, of course, and some of it is like the last two speakers we had, kind of general for all products. But the truth is, many of us actually build products that are physical in nature, and there are some nuances. So I want to spend some time talking about that. So, for example, products permeate our world. They're all around us. What are you sitting on right now? What is the device that you use to log in today? What is surrounding you? If you look around, literally the building, what was it built with? And what are you drinking, right? So all of these are products, right? The chair, the computer, the drywall or the brick, the coffee, or perhaps some of you, the vodka. No judgment. I'm all for that. It's afternoon, right? So we're all good. But all of these products are physical, and then there are literally millions more, right? And so it can be a motor, it can be a piece of furniture, it can be a beverage or a food. All of these things are products that have to be built, that have product managers, and their operations around how to create those products can be slightly different than some of the stuff that we learn and read from a software and digital perspective. So let's just talk a little bit about the differences. You may have seen this visual. It's Martin Erickson. He created this almost a dozen years ago or so, or about a decade ago. I love it. Martin Erickson's brilliant thought leader in product management, founder of Product Tank and Mind the Product. Brilliant guy, love his content. This visual essentially is him saying the product manager is the intersection of business, technology, and user experience. And I happen to agree with that. I think it's a perfect, simple way to show the role of product manager in a software company, right? I think it's perfect for a software company. In my opinion, it misses a little bit of the physical world or non-software. So I believe those product managers that sit in a physical product world, our image looks a little bit more like this. So we're the intersection of business, engineering, and operations. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about those. What's the same in those visuals and in our worlds? Business. At the end of the day, the product manager role is a business role, period. I'm a very, very strong believer in that. We exist to bring business value to our organization. Hopefully we do that through creating products that bring value to our customers and to the markets, right? But regardless of the mechanisms, the business model, the type of company or the type of products that we have. Product managers exist to drive business success, period, right? So business is the same connector across all companies and all products. Where we start to differ slightly is whereas the other image is technology, I have broadened that somewhat to engineering, because in physical companies and in physical products, oftentimes there are various types of engineering. It's not just computer science. Well, there may be some computer scientists and software developers. It could be aerospace engineers, civil engineers, mechanical, right? Depending on what you're building. There may be biomedical scientists or nuclear physicists who are literally, helping you build and engineer the product. And those are slightly different. So while we don't need to be engineers ourselves in product management, although many of us are, we do need to understand some science. So again, it's not just information technology, it's the foundation, if you will, of all of engineering. And depending on where we are, we actually need to understand nuanced versions of engineering. So that's slightly different in a software versus non-software world. And then finally, operations. Operations in any organization is the function responsible for the creation of goods and services, the actual manufacturing and creation of those goods. Now, in most physical goods companies, that means supply chain, facilities management, manufacturing, inventory control, etc. And especially in times like this, it's really, really important for us as product managers to understand the interconnectedness of these processes and these groups. Again, last few months, anyone building any kind of physical good that had components or manufacturing done in China or virtually anywhere in the world at this point, they had a serious interruption in their supply chain. And I, as a product manager, can't get my product into the hands of customers if I can't get the components, if I can't get it manufactured, right? So we have to understand that. Software is not so much reliant on all of these other kind of components and groups within the organization. So again, just a slight difference in product management between software and physical goods. So what do we do? If we live in this world and we build physical products, how do we become great? Obviously, there are lots of different capabilities and needs and skills that a product manager has. I'm going to focus on two because I've found that these two areas or umbrellas of capabilities really kind of dictate how well we navigate the world that we live in. Customer market knowledge and navigation of processes. So customer market knowledge, we, again, have to rely on lots of business processes, including our own kind of development world. We've got lots of, customer market knowledge is kind of understanding all of the customer chain, which we'll go into. Navigation of process is understanding all of these various business processes and even our own product development world, right? So sometimes we have waterfall and agile working in the same organization. So let's start talking about customer market insights. So obviously any product manager needs to understand their market dynamics and their customer needs, but what happens a lot of times in our world, because we're often B2B or B2B2B or B2B2C, right? We have these layers of customers or users in between the product manager and that end person who's utilizing the product, and that gets cumbersome. It's hard to find how to prioritize those customers. It's hard to find feedback from all those customers, but it's our job to understand all of those. So let me just walk through a couple of examples. So let's say I was a product manager for a wearable health tracker, a watch or a Fitbit or something of that. My frontline customer may be an independent sales organization or a distributor. That's who I get the product in the hands of to get to the second line customer, which may be a big box retailer, right? Now, these two individual businesses are going to have different needs. They're going to care about different things. The retailer is going to care about foot traffic and demand and inventory sell-through. The frontline customer is going to care about, or the distributor is going to care about profitability and relationships. Well, none of those are the end user, right? We've still got the individual consumer who wears our product or uses our product. They care about style, what data is captured, et cetera. Well, as a product manager, we have to understand all of these. We have to understand the end user because that's who we're ultimately making the product for. But we've also got to understand what drives the retailer. How do we get the shelf space for them? How do we motivate the buyer in that organization? How do we understand the distributor and get good relationships with them? It can even get more complicated when we're talking about kind of component products. So let's say I build a motor for a conveyor belt, which is just a component in a larger system. My customer chain may look something like, I work through an independent sales organization. They sell through a distributor who then sells to the original equipment manufacturer, the OEM, the actual company who builds the conveyor belt, the whole system, and then they sell to a customer, and that customer may be a beverage maker, right, or a manufacturer. Well, even that's not the end consumer, if you will, or end customer, because the person responsible for the manufacturing or the facilities of that company, that beverage company, their employees and their people are literally using the conveyor belt. They have no idea that my component is a part of it, right? But I still have to understand their needs. I still have to understand what they're going through. And so you can see just by the virtue of this slide, it gets complex. And so we have to understand all of these issues and then prioritize the needs. The other thing about being in this world is often, not always, but often we have to have a certain level of domain knowledge. We have to know the industry itself, right? So for example, if I'm building something for nuclear plants, right, I better have a good understanding of nuclear physics. Even as a product manager, my job is not to be the engineer or to be the scientist. I still have to understand. And so oftentimes what happens is that because it's easier, frankly, to learn product management than it is to learn nuclear physics, I would have a harder time going into a nuclear products company as a product expert than someone who already understood the domain going into a product role. But it's also harder for those people who go from an engineering role or an operations role into a product role because it's a different role. It's a different mindset. And so domain knowledge is a great thing that is required for most of us in this world, but it also can get in the way. Now, let's talk a little bit about processes. I'm just going to do a quick time check, I think. I mentioned, and Sid, you mentioned this as well, I call it Wagile. You've probably heard that term before, but there are so many products now that are connected or smart, right? The Internet of Things, et cetera. So even physical products that before were just physical products that were not connected to anything are now having a digital component in it, right? And so sometimes in our own organization, we've got a group of individuals running in an agile shop, and we've got a group of individuals that are making the physical products that waterfall works better. We need more checks and balances along the way. And so as a product manager, it's difficult because we've got to navigate all of those processes. At some point, waterfall, agile, the hardware, the software has to come together, and it's our job to kind of be the steward of that unification. That's not easy. That's something that we've got to master and get better at. Again, just a slight nuance when you've got both hardware and software or waterfall and agile. I mentioned this before, it's really, really important. It's almost like a whole other type of business, if you will, that we have to learn as product managers. We have to understand how supply chain, inventory, manufacturing processes, how these impact our products. Again, just to use kind of the world we're living in now. If I had a product that I had a big partner or vendor in China making some of the components or the hardware itself, well, guess what? They were shut down for most of January. After Chinese New Year, employees didn't come back to the factories. And so there were months of time that literally months where we either couldn't get components or products, or we had to air freight versus ship, which is a 5 times cost element. That's a business problem for us as product managers, and we have to navigate all of that. It's not easy, but we have to do it. We're business people at the end of the day, and we've got to understand those impacts. Again, investment decisions, it's not as if software doesn't cost money to make. Of course it does. But oftentimes in physical worlds, we actually have capital outlays, real physical hard dollars that are going out of this for creation of products or management of products, right? So that may be creating die cuts, that may be components or inventory, spare parts, et cetera, that we literally have to outlay funds. And so we've got to have a financial acumen to understand, being the stewards of our company's money, you know, if we're going to put hard dollars out the door, and I'm not saying that the soft dollar resource time isn't important of software creation, but it's a different type of capital. It's a different type of financial situation. So again, just a slight nuance that we have to be aware of as physical product folks. And then finally, this risk of release, right? And so again, we spend, in some cases, literally years trying to get a product tested and approved through relations, depending on what it is, med devices, for example. And so once we're in that process, it's really important to keep going through that process. And then the other thing is, it's slightly easier to roll back or change a software product than it is a hardware product, right? If you've, you know, ever had an automobile recall, right? That is a more cumbersome product, a more cumbersome process and experience for the customer. And let's be honest, I mean, some of us have products that are, you know, people's lives are on the line, literally, right? Masks for firefighters and personal radiation detectors. Let's try not to have recalls for those, right? And so the risk of releasing a product is higher in some cases for physical products. And so that's why the process, the way that we go about creating the products in the first place is a little bit more cumbersome and important that we get it right. Few things to follow up on common pitfalls, touching on some of the things we talked about. A lot of times what happens is, because we get so operations focused and there's so many different processes we use, and we have to be the business owners of our products, we get too inwardly focused. My challenge to you is to spend at least 20% of your time with customers in the market. We are still customer advocates. We're still market experts, or we should be. 20% of your time may sound like not a lot for those of you who do it well. It may sound like an extraordinary amount of time for some of you. It's a goal, right? If you spend 20% of your time, I promise you, you will get more customer and market oriented, which is a wonderful thing for you. You know, this is a really hard one, especially for those of us who come from an engineering background. And a lot of product managers just are innately problem solvers, which means that we try to be the expert on the solution and solve everything. As a product manager, you're really not the expert on the solution. You're the expert on the problem. You're the expert on the customer, right? So because of this engineering background, sometimes we get too solution oriented. Again, I challenge you to always be the advocate for the customer and be the person in the organization who understands the need and the market dynamics better than anyone else, not necessarily understands the solution better than anyone else. And then honestly, sometimes, and again, this is variant by your industry, but a lot of industries in this world move fairly slowly, right? We've got, you know, long-term contracts or products that don't overturn, you know, except every 5 to 10 years, literally. And so, I mean, frankly, that's just a kind of human nature way to get complacent. But here's the truth of the matter. Nobody's buying product. They're buying what it can do for them. Nobody needs the actual product itself. They need the solution behind, you know, what's helping them with their problem. So if a competitor is out there innovating, even in a slow moving market, when that contract is up or when that customer is ready, you're going to lose that business. So just don't get complacent, right? Innovate as much as you can. So just to summarize, again, we as physical product manufacturers, we sit at the intersection of business, engineering, operations. We have to understand all those layers of the customers, which isn't always easy. We need to be the problem expert. Even if we understand the solution very well, we're still the problem expert. We've got to navigate all of these processes and understand from a business perspective. And then ultimately, let's not get complacent. Let's not get too internally focused or solution oriented. So with that, hopefully I have enough time for some questions, or you can just chat with the group, kind of what are your biggest obstacles. On the next slide, I've got some contact information. I'd love to connect with you guys as well. So Sid, any questions?
Well, that's what I'm going to ask everybody else. If you would be so kind as to put some comments in the chat window, I'd appreciate it. Meanwhile, I will ask you this one question. what do you think is the most common error that you've seen product managers make in terms of getting feedback for their products?
Great question. Most, especially in B2B world, which isn't always physical. Obviously, there's a lot of consumer physical products, but especially in a B2B world, it is relying on sales field, the salespeople or account managers for all of the feedback, right? So hearsay is what I call it, right? Or one layer removed from the actual customer, because they think, well, the salespeople are in the field, they're frontline, they're talking to customers every day. All I have to do is talk to the salespeople. The salespeople will tell me what the customers are saying. That's a mistake in a couple ways. One, I mean, listen, right? The salespeople do talk to customers all the time, so do take that feedback, but take it with a grain of salt. It's coming from a salesperson. The salespeople are asking the question context, right? An immediate kind of sale account management relationship way. It's not necessarily the feedback that we need to get for long-term strategies, right? For where their business is going, and then accordingly where our products need to go. And also, just to finish that up, as the first two speakers said, customers can't always articulate what they want. They'll say, I need XYZ. Well, XYZ is not a need. It's some sort of solution that they have in their head. And what they say and what they need and what they do are totally different things. And so the more we can get in direct contact with customers, the better. And again, not letting kind of that hearsay or one step removed being kind of a hurdle.
JJ, do you think that that if we're coming from a software environment like myself, and then we get into products, I did that because I needed to get knowledgeable about products to achieve what I wanted to achieve. I mean, physical products to achieve what I wanted to achieve. But do you think that transition to become a professional physical product developer from a professional software product developer, is that possible? And maybe is there some things that we should really start looking into if that's something we want to do?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, absolutely, it's possible. Again, a couple of things, and this is just my experience, and it's certainly not based on any kind of deep research. I actually find one of the issues that software people have moving to physical goods is the domain knowledge I talked about. And again, that's not relevant for every industry, but if it's a very niche kind of detailed industry, detailed healthcare science or nuclear physics, again, you're going to have a learning curve there. That aside, just generally speaking, sometimes software companies, while they do the engine of development really well, they don't necessarily do product strategy and product management of existing products very well. In other words, they're always in this engine, this iterative of creating new features, and they become this feature factory as opposed to a business of products, if that makes sense. And so sometimes, if as a software product manager, even if you know how to create a software product really well, you need to remember the basis of product management, and that is having the strategy for where your product wants to go, and then being able to manage it in the long run. So absolutely, it's possible. Software product managers can translate, and vice versa. There may be some domain expertise and some, again, business processes learning curve, but you can definitely do it.
Does anybody else have any other questions? We've got a question from Kristen, who's talking about she's got the domain knowledge, but she's having issues getting the business to understand why we need to have a product strategy for our hardware solutions. Any advice?
Yeah, that's a great question, and probably take it offline. Tweet me or email me or something. I'd love to talk to you more about this because it's not an easy answer. It goes to influence. It goes to having some information and data behind your story, right? And in other words, some understanding of what sales are today versus where they should be, right? Because anyone who thinks you don't need a product strategy is blinded by complacency in some ways, right? And blinded by almost recency. And so you're going to have to craft a story of of course, we're doing okay now, but what's around the corner, right? How are we setting ourselves up for the future? And so without being too general in my answer, it's a kind of a, I don't want to take too long. So I would ask Kristen, I think you said her name was Kristen, I would definitely ask you to email me or tweet or something, connect on LinkedIn, and I'd love to talk more about that.
At this point in time, I'd like to go ahead and open this up to a